The fact that prisons aren't safe doesn't really come as a surprise to anyone. However, it seems that as the years go by, violence and tension behind bars seems to increase. One factor that may help explain this phenomenon is the presence of prison gangs, many of which come from a Hispanic origin. With that being said, stay tuned, because in this video, we'll go deep inside the life of Mexican gang members in prison. The prison gangs. Life in prison has never been easy. To survive in such an environment, criminals always had to follow rules imposed by wardens, a set of orders that form a somewhat convict code. Political scientist and academic David Skarbek describes it as basically just minding your own business, trying to stay out of trouble with both guards and other inmates, not ranting or bothering anybody. Sometimes, inmates had success. For some others, there were unavoidable troubles. However, it was a quite simple structure to follow through. In the 1950s, things started to change. Prisons got bigger, and with them, the total inmate population. Everything became more ethnically and racially mixed and more unpredictable. Jails began to receive floods of criminals with all kinds of offenses, and rebels began to emerge, those who would defy the code. Plus, problems such as overcrowding, severe punishment policies, inadequate healthcare, security, and working conditions started to emerge. As a result, little by little, the rules that sustained the minimum harmony in prisons were dismantled, and authorities lost control. Stuck in a no man's land, prisoners had to make a choice: unite themselves or live without protection. And with that, the first prison gangs were created. But what began as simple organizations looking for safety in a hostile environment quickly escalated to powerful groups that are now unified for profit. To talk about prison gangs nowadays is to talk about prominent members who are the true custodians of order in penitentiaries, members who make their own rules and establish all kinds of illicit activities, having wardens in the palm of their hands, members with an influence that is unrestrained by prison bars, enough to keep illegal transactions on the outside and continue to consume rivalries and old vendettas between street groups. According to Skarbek, once those gangs came to be, different groups, unsurprisingly, started a dispute to decide which was the better or bigger gang. An arms race started, and gangs tried to prove their influence and establish dominance by committing homicides and assaults upon one another. A fight that still continues to this day, ignited by the rivalries between gangs that developed throughout the decades for power and control. One could make a quick search and find out that the most prominent gangs in the United States are the Hispanic ones, arguably being the most disruptive and influential ones in impacting American prison institutions and administrations. In fact, one of the first prison gangs to emerge was the Mexican Mafia, or La M. The Mexican Mafia was founded at the Duell Vocational Institution in Tracy, California, in 1956 by former street gang member Luis Huero Buff Flores. It originated with the idea to recruit incarcerated members of established Hispanic gangs around Los Angeles County to form the Gang of Gangs. They would eventually grow and relentlessly control the entire California prison system, the largest in the country. And, let me tell you, they came pretty close to such accomplishments, considering how quickly the gang took hold and grew in both numbers and power. Over time, the Mafia sure proved its reputation as one of the deadliest prison gangs, establishing a real criminal enterprise through all sorts of illegal activities, inside and outside prison: murder, assault, robbery, extortion, drug trafficking, and arms dealing. Los Carnales, as they are also known, don't really shy away from being part of the gang in public. On the contrary, they want to stand out from the crowd by tattooing the gang symbols all over their bodies. There's actually a common ritual between prison gangs to identify brothers and rivals. You could consider it their military uniform that helps tell their story. For Mexican Mafia members, images such as Aztec gods, two-headed snakes, the letters of Las Letras, and the Black Hand of Death, which pays homage to Sicilian Mafia members, were printed all over their torsos. Its reach was expanded enough to influence thousands to gather around and create other gangs. So, to properly consolidate their power and be able to create a true trafficking network to continue to have contact with the outside world, street gangs that pledged loyalty to the Mexican Mafia were born. The Sureños, Hispanics from the south, those affiliated with the Mafia, had everything they could ever want: money, expensive cars, nice watches, girls, and so on. With great power comes great enemies. In 1965, a group of inmates, members of the Mexican Mafia, formed a new gang called Nuestra Familia, in opposition to the influence of the southern Hispanics. Their claims were that they were being assaulted and treated as inferior by Mexican Mafia members once they came from Northern California, a rural farming area. Tensions eventually grew between the Sureños and the newborn Norteños until a member of one gang stole a pair of shoes from another. That ultimately sparked the longest-running gang war in California, which continues today. To identify themselves, members of Nuestra Familia are known to wear red bandanas and tattoo symbols such as the number 14 and the letter N as the 14th letter in the the English alphabet, plus image of a sombrero with a machete. Another prison gang worth mentioning to understand those gang life dynamics in prison is the Tango Orejon. Originating in San Antonio, Texas, the group is the #1 gang threat in the state. To pay homage to their motherland, members tattoo icons from San Antonio, such as the Alamo, the San Antonio skyline, the 210 area code, the San Antonio Spurs logo, and the bunny rabbit. Just like the Nuestra Familia gang, Orejones also had to battle the Mexican mafia on prison yards and the streets to establish themselves independently. Their origin dates back to the 1970s, when San Antonio-based inmates had the sole purpose of watching each other's backs and making some money. They didn't even have a set of rules, a constitution, or any hierarchy whatsoever. However, once they started to be used by the Mexican mafia as crash dummies, doing all the dirty work for La M without getting any of the rewards, tension began and a war brewed. So, basically, if the gangs themselves weren't dangerous enough, the disputes and rivalries between them are what really shake things up behind prison bars. Is it really as threatening as it sounds? Or, once inside, different Mexican gang members are forced to get along? Keep a close watch. Prisons like the Pelican Bay State Prison and the Santa Rita Jail in California and the Bexar County Jail in Texas are just some of the institutions that can serve as an example of this reality. Several inmates from each penitentiary are gang members, and some have to deal with their rivals on a daily basis. That naturally brings a dreadful atmosphere inside those jails. And the truth is, if one is careless enough, it may cost them their life. Guards are aware that a lone member of a Nuestra Familia gang in a crowd of Mexican mafia members will quickly lead to tragedy. To try to deal with it, there's an entire planned schedule of releasing inmates for recreational time, cell inspections, and so on. Everything has to be calculated in order to prevent chaos. To keep control, guards have to always stay a step ahead of these gangsters. The only option they have to achieve this feat is to maintain constant vigilance over the prisoners. A vigilance that, at Santa Rita Jail, starts the moment inmates walk through the door. Deputies work at the intake, transfer, and release area known as ITR, where arrestees become inmates.
Have you been charged with any assaults on the police?
No.
Been charged with any assaults on other inmates?
No.
Deputy Terry Carson interviews prisoners to determine their criminal past and to figure out whether they have gang affiliations and where to put them. Knowing what sort of crime they're charged with helps to think about what kind of threat they might pose to other inmates. The information gathered by the staff is used to classify the prisoners as they are color-coded accordingly. Inmates with blue jumpsuits are considered medium security, posing a low threat to others. Yellow jumpsuits are given to those with heavy charges or a violent record in prison, while red is suited for inmates headed to protective custody or administrative segregation. This way, it's easy to keep gang members separate as an attempt to maintain peace. A similar approach takes place at Pelican Bay. There, most of the inmates belong to some prison gang. The prison was designed as an upgraded version of San Quentin and Folsom prisons, two old California facilities, all in order to allow a much greater level of control over its prisoners. The population is sectioned into yards and blocks that have little or no contact with one another, and that allows inmates to be grouped with their respective affiliations to avoid confrontation. Upon identifying a gang member, the guards can define this location, modulate his freedom, and decide the level of surveillance to which he'll be submitted. On every cell block, there are colored identity cards on the wall with each inmate's name and photo. Each color represents a different gang affiliation. Green is for Northern Hispanics, pink for Southern Hispanics, black for blacks, white for whites, and yellow for others, including Native Americans and Mexicans. With this information, wardens are able to also avoid potential confrontations and establish a smooth running for the institution. Meanwhile, at Bexar County Jail, the wardens there also decide to segregate the enemies. Each gang is housed on its own separate pod, spread over the 6 floors of the facility.
Our concept is if we have to house them somewhere, let's house them in a place where we're going to have the least amount of problems. If we segregate them, we take them out of population, contain them there, we tend to be a lot more productive in dealing with these gangs. We also are able to learn more about them. And there's the old saying, know your enemy.
However, what David Scarbeck argues is that, differently from what we normally assume by being a source of disorder, the major gangs' presence at those prisons were actually the ones responsible for inflicting order. Of course, no one is saying that there's no violence in those prisons. The reality in jail is indeed brutal. Despite all the efforts, clashes and brawls between gangs happen all the time, and deputies are often caught in the crossfire. Homicides, assaults, violent beat-ups, anything can happen at literally any time. I mean, being locked up 23 hours a day can make anyone go over the edge and lose lose control, forcing special forces to intervene. It is dangerous, and it's up to both guards and inmates to stay on the lookout. The thing is that once in prison, inmates are under a certain set of rules. To get around them and be able to keep up with their activity, those criminal groups proved themselves as highly sophisticated organizations, with carefully plotted strategies and business development plans. Gangs came up with a real network in which they set up drug trafficking, contraband, and other illegal trades behind bars. Prison officers are aware of that, and if they want to try to stop it, they only have one alternative: be as organized as the gangs. At Santa Rita, a special unit was created to track the ever-changing gang world, the Gang Classification Unit. Its main purpose is to build a full record of each gang member that will be attached to them during prison time and follow them beyond into the streets. It serves as a vital piece of information that gets shared with the police. Such a system is essential to try to keep control over prisoners, especially when we consider that sometimes the prison guards can become pretty much outnumbered given the vast number of inmates in the institution, around 4,000 prisoners.
You've got, anywhere from 8 to 12 people on a shift working down here, but at any given time you could be working with up to 300 inmates.
To maintain control, deputies at Santa Rita and Bexar routinely organize shakedowns. These operations are made with two main goals. First, to search prisoners' cells by turning the place upside down to uncover any contraband such as drugs, weapons, or alcohol. Second, to impose their force upon prisoners in order to remind them that they are the ones in charge. That also happens whenever a deputy gets assaulted by an inmate as a way of payback. Once gang members get struck by violence, the answer is always to inflict it back in a swift and measured response. Whenever this happens, tensions arise, as any slight show of defiance can quickly turn into another attack. But with a surprise element in the deputy's favor, these operations are often successful. Guards put the prisoners away, strip them in their cells, bring them out of their cells, and search the place. It's pretty simple, but very effective. But, as Scarbeck theorizes, even in a place where the control over its population is pretty much total, with every kind of transaction superintended by whoever is in charge, there is always room for alternate currencies and hidden markets to arise, and if they are banned, others quickly spring up to take their place. As much as the wardens try to control and limit the prisoners physically, the gangs will always have a way to go around it and turn the prison rules into their own. A flaw in the system. In order to prevent the bloodbaths inside facilities, once recreational time hits, guards at Pelican Bay have to release prisoners in careful order, with each inmate being sent out of their cell blocks at a time. After being strip searched, they walk into the yard and go to their respective spots. Once Hispanic prisoners sit down and wait at a picnic table, a black inmate heads to a workout area, while another Hispanic walks up to a different spot. We soon realize that there's a tactic behind all of this. Each has picked a meeting point for their gang. A similar routine takes place at Santa Rita. The Gang Classification Unit keeps an eye on how the prisoners racially divide themselves in the yard and how they behave in order to determine one inmate's role, who's the authority, who's a bodyguard, and who are the newly added members. After gathering with their affiliates, prisoners go for a nearly orchestrated stroll around the yard to try to eavesdrop the other groups in order to see what each gang is up to, so that when they return to their rendezvous point, they have fresh information about who's going to attack whom, who's selling what to whom, and so on. But it's not solely at the yard that Pelican Bay inmates get to communicate and collect information. Prisoners there are known for using a technique called fishlining. Fishlining is when an inmate attaches an object to one end of a string and slides it out of the cell into the prison hallway. Then he uses the other end to pull the object across the floor to send it to the targeted cell. As a result, prisoners not only created a communication system, but also a contraband distribution system. Something that the Gang Classification Unit at Santa Rita noticed is how inmates found another way to communicate, through codes. Wardens affirm that they generally come as coded artwork, and that in those drawings are hidden important clues of affiliation, rivalries, and of potential conflict. At Pelican Bay, various prisoners also send in coded messages in intricate artwork. Those drawings have indicators that are very hard to be broken, but contain urgent messages, such as an order to get someone killed. If that wasn't enough, gang members are also trained in micrography, a micro-writing technique in which they can write and decipher extremely tiny letters in order to produce amounts of tightly rolled pieces of paper named kites. These kites are transported in their rectum from inmate to inmate, from prison to prison. One of the main subjects of those messages is a classification process of new arrivals. Just as the jail is constantly looking to organize and study incoming prisoners, so do the gangs themselves, and they have a pretty strict classification process that starts the moment an inmate walks into a new cell house.
When they come in, they have to check in, and when they check in, they have to give, from the time they started coming into custody, first crime that they ever committed to up until now, they have to list each and every crime that they committed, where they went, where they stayed, what state prison they were in, who this cellie was, and all that stuff. So they have to have that track record there. It's like writing up their resume.
The questionnaires are collected and checked by the inmates to see whether a new arrival can be trusted. If so, he'll assume a role in the equivalent gang structure. If not, the response may come as a violent act. And if an inmate dares to consider not joining any prison gangs, he might think again.
You've got to run with somebody, okay? Because sooner or later, you're gonna get caught up in a situation where who are you gonna turn to? Yourself, you know? Because if you're out there by yourself, there are sharks watching you left and right. They're gonna come try to use you. They're gonna come try something to get over on you. That's how it works.
When we stop to think, deputies are truly under constant pressure to try to stop attacks. The only possible way they have to control gang members is to coffin them under the maximum strict conditions, making communication pretty much impossible. The staff can suspend their circulation with the rest of the prison population and establish rare and carefully monitored visits, or they can even go up to an extreme measure and house them in the secure housing unit, the maximum level of surveillance and restriction, which gang leaders are directly headed to. There, they are doomed to have zero contact with other inmates for the entirety of their sentence under solitary confinement, at least, apparently. I say that because these members always find a way. The smallest flaw in the system, they do so by establishing an entire system behind the prison system itself, centered on how to behave, who to talk to, what to do, and with whom to be with. The gangsters have their own set of rules by which they operate and dictate their routine in the jail units. These go by rigorous laws that, if not strictly followed, can result in violent punishment. It's up to the guards to work in order to keep peace in a place with danger lurking at every corner. It's a constant battle for control between the deputies and the prison gangs between other groups, and prison gang members within themselves. Gangster way of life. If prison gangs are around, the threat of violence is ever present. The gang world is a ruthless one to exist in. Most gangs are known for having their own constitutions and extensive packs of rules, by which many members will fall submissive for the rest of their lives. That is the case with the Mexican Mafia, known for being one of the deadliest prison gangs. Members are known for their secrecy, code of silence, and uncompromising violence. Inside the prison system, Los Carnales have their own membership requirements. Race always plays a crucial point, but in this case, and also to Nuestra Familia, what we have is a blood in, blood out oath, meaning that in order to enter the group, one has to murder somebody, ordered by the gang members. And once you're in, there's no way out, unless of course you also die. The Mexican Mafia members aren't willing to let defectors roam around revealing their practices. In fact, gang members despise dropouts. They consider them traitors of the highest order, and once a traitor, you become a target. This comes as especially worrying behind bars, where the gangs are the ones setting the unofficial rules. If the gang initiation is often violent, getting kicked out is even worse. The act called removal is a quick but violent one, where a gang member slices the other in the face with a weapon. The slice leaves a permanent mark and lets other gang members know that the individual is a dropout, what they call no good. From then on, the situation only gets worse. Attacks and assaults tend to escalate until the defector is taken down. Although aware of its dangers and consequences, some inmates just can't take the gangster's life. Once they give up, inmates are taken into protective custody at their facilities for protection against retaliations. One of these dropouts is an ex-Tango Orejon member, Jose Santos. Guards came to his rescue when he tried to commit suicide after being badly beaten by the gang members.
On several occasions I got jumped. On others, I had just fought one-on-one. They wouldn't leave me alone because I was an ex-member.
Differently from the highly structured criminal organization that is the Mexican Mafia, the Orejones don't have a hierarchy or constitution. They have no leaders, no laws, and don't care about rules or ranks. Rather, they decide everything by consensus, in a fine line between democracy and anarchy that is frequently crossed. Their goal is to simply impose their will over the other jail inmates. Formed by mostly young and aggressive members following no authority, the Tango Orejones aren't much less dangerous than all the other gangs. It's true that you can leave the gang, but you have to subject yourself to at least one beating that lasts from 2 to 5 minutes. The problem with Jose is that the beatings never stopped. He is also a target. Cracking under pressure, the prisoner feels at risk at the general population unit, but doesn't want to go to protective custody in order to avoid the image of a snitch and make him an even bigger target. The alternative was the homosexual pod, which has always been gang-free, to the point of straight prisoners playing gay just to stay away from the gangs. There, Jose found some peace. Another one of those dropouts is Brian Curlis, who tried his best to stay out of harm's way among so much violence. His decision turned him into a constant target for the rest of his life. He knows that. He knows that he isn't safe, not even in protective custody.
I don't think you're any safer here than you are on the main line. At any time, anything you do, you sit at the wrong table, you use the wrong shower,
it could get you hurt.
And indeed, not even in protective custody. Anyone can turn on you at any moment. Your former brothers are now the ones coming for you. Some gang members are ordered to go undercover and pretend to be dropouts, only to get into protective custody and murder real dropouts. This happened to former Mexican mafia members Mike and Alfonso, who decided to leave the gang for good. Fortunately enough, the undercover gangster got caught and wardens managed to prevent a bloodshed. However, even with the fact of having to live the rest of their lives with someone trying to kill them, they don't regret a second of it. In fact, they look forward to a new start.
Man, the day I became an ex-gang member, I knew I didn't have to answer to nobody. I didn't have to carry myself, and I was my own man, dude. I didn't have to. It was like a brick, like he said, a sack of potatoes off your shoulders. I feel like it's over with. It was like if I was a new man, dude.
And you, would you have what it takes to endure a Mexican gang lifestyle in prison? If you like this content, make sure to click on one of the cards on the screen to watch similar videos.